Hi everyone, your old friend Will Sloan here with a special report. For much of the 1930s, the most popular cartoon character in America was not Mickey Mouse, but Popeye the Sailor. And while Walt Disney reigned as animation's unquestioned master, he faced his strongest competition from Fleischer Studios.
I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm strong to the finish, 'cause I eat me spinach. I'm Popeye the Swag Whaler Man.
Fleischer Studios was founded in 1929 by brothers Max and Dave Fleischer. Max ran the studio and Dave directed the cartoons. It was headquartered in Manhattan, the other side of the continent from Disney. And if there's one thing you probably know about their house style, it's that they were a product of New York in the 30s. Where Disney's characters frolicked in the woods, the Fleischers lived on the mean city streets. Their cartoons were tougher, more surreal, more violent, funnier, and sometimes even a little sexier than the competition. You can thank the Fleischers for everything from Robert Crumb to Ren and Stimpy. If you're anything like me, you grew up watching Fleischer cartoons without necessarily knowing the name. Of course, they were the first to bring Popeye from the comics to the screen. Not the domesticated Popeye of the 50s and 60s, who hung out in the suburbs, but the Popeye who was violent and muttered off-color innuendo under his breath. There was also Betty Boop, when her garter belt was so visible in the pre-code era.
Strike up the band, get ready for something grand. A wonderful treat, you're going to meet the stars of the future. Ooh.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. This amazing stranger from the planet Krypton, the Man of Steel.
And there were the Superman cartoons, the most expensive cartoons of their day, whose Art Deco style would be the direct influence on Batman, the animated series. But there were countless other weird and lively Fleischer cartoons that you'll easily identify by their fluid, off-kilter animation style and technical innovations. Perhaps you saw Cobweb Hotel, or All's Fair at the Fair, or Play Safe, or Christmas Comes But Once a Year, to name just four that I saw repeatedly on VHS as a child. The Fleischers' breakthrough series was the groundbreaking Out of the Inkwell, in which the animated Coco the Clown was controlled by a live-action animator. They achieved striking results with rotoscoping and cartoons where animated characters interacted with live-action environments. They also pioneered that particular type of musical cartoon in which audiences were invited to sing along by following the bouncing ball.
Keep your eye on the little bouncing ball. Each little string will make you sing if you follow the tune of the silvery moon.
Before Walt Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the Fleischers expanded the form with a series of two-reel color specials starring Popeye that were marketed as feature attractions. Popeye Meets Sinbad the Sailor, Popeye Meets Ali Baba and His 40 Thieves, and Aladdin and His Wonderful Lamp. In 1938, the studio relocated to Miami in a move that would be the beginning of the end. The previous year, Snow White had become a phenomenon, and the Fleischers decided to follow Disney into feature filmmaking. Their 1939 film Gulliver's Travels was a success for distributor Paramount, but put a financial strain on Fleischer Studios. That production, as well as personal problems between the brothers, caused their relationship to deteriorate, with the two eventually communicating only by inter-office memo. The subsequent feature, Mr. Bug Goes to Town, was a financial disaster that spelled the end of an empire. The Fleischers sold their studio and its intellectual property to Paramount, who turned it into Famous Studios, whose output would plumb new depths of mediocrity. In later years, Max worked as head of animation for the educational film company Jam Handy. His son, by the way, was Richard Fleischer, the director of such films as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Fantastic Voyage, Dr. Dolittle, and my personal favorite, Mandingo.
Spend the night at the Cobweb Hotel. You find that the service is swell. Now you needn't be shy, I won't harm a fly. Spend the night at the Cobweb Hotel.
Over the decades, many of the Fleischer cartoons lapsed into the public domain and have suffered neglect. Luckily, a grassroots group is dedicated to their preservation and distribution, Fabulous Fleischer Cartoons Restored. Since premiering some of their restorations at the Museum of Modern Art in March to a rapturous reception, the group has booked theatrical screenings across North America. Here in Toronto, Canada, you can see some of their Fleischer restorations at the Fox Theatre on August 17th, 18th, and 20th. For this conversation, I was joined by 3 members of the restoration team. Mauricio Alvarado, the CEO of the vintage merchandising company Rockin' Pins, Ray Pointer, animation historian and author of The Art and Inventions of Max Fleischer, and Max Fleischer's granddaughter, Jane Fleischer. We spoke over Zoom, and I was particularly thrilled when Mauricio showed me that he had acquired the original artwork from the VHS box of one of the public domain cartoon tapes I watched a lot as a child.
Beware! Take care!
The Fleischer cartoons, I mean, they were very present in my childhood because so many of them were on, inexpensive public domain VHS tapes, the sort of tapes you'd get at the dollar store or the grocery store. A lot of the Popeye cartoons, for instance. Mauricio, did you have a sort of similar experience with them as a child? And Ray, what sort of presence did they have in your life growing up?
Oh, I could write another book on that.
Go ahead and start, Ray, and I could actually bring the cassette tape that started it all for me.
Well, I was of the first generation that saw these when they were first sold to television 65, 67 years ago, 1955, 56. And I was a preschooler. First, the Out of the Inkwells, and then the Betty Boops, of course. And then Popeye went on the following year. And Popeye got the most exposure in the Detroit area, but I immediately was interested in drawing and animation from seeing those, particularly the Out of the Inkwells, because of all the magical things that came off from the pen tip of Max Fleischer. And magically, all these things would come to life or come off from the tip and interact with him and create all sorts of mischief and fun things. So that's what created my interest in all of this. And interestingly, as I say in my book, I had a dream about it, where I visited Max and upset his famous inkwell unknowingly. And 10 years later, that whole thing came full circle when I met him when he was on his way to Expo 67, and he stopped off to see some old friends at Jam Handy, and he happened to walk in during my interview. And he spent 20 minutes talking to me when he saw some of the samples that I was doing at that particular time. So that's something I'll always remember the rest of my life.
That's extraordinary.
With my experience with this stuff, same thing with the public domain tapes. And like I said, I have the tape that started it all, the 50 Classic.
I'm so glad you raised that because I had a 50 Classics, the same font, but it had a different cover. And I don't know if it was the same cartoons, but it was the same font. It was the same brand. And getting it as a kid, it's like, oh my God, it's got Popeye and Superman and Bugs Bunny and Daffy and the Three Stooges are all in this. They're probably all hanging out together.
If it'll make you guys feel any better, I have it too.
Well, I'm gonna blow your mind, right? This cassette has always been in my head. This is what put all these cartoons in my brain and in my brother's brain. And as we grow older, we start getting this sense of nostalgia, and we start looking back at what made our childhood great and stuff like that. You're not gonna believe this. A year ago, I think, the original paintings for the public domain tapes went on sale.
Oh my God.
Oh no.
This is like seeing a Monet for me. Oh my God. It's so emotional seeing that.
You mentioned the other one, right? Is this one it?
That's it. Oh my God. That is it.
Dude, I own the original paintings for the public domain tape.
Oh my God, the 50 Classic cartoons. Oh my God, I got it at Toys R Us when I was probably 4 years old. I was 4. I still remember seeing that picture on the box and thinking, this looks like the greatest thing I've ever seen. I wasn't savvy enough yet to know what a public domain tape was.
That's hysterical. All of you.
Oh my God, there it is. It's incredible to think of that existing and somebody actually painting it. Somebody went to a lot of work to paint that.
Well, I'm surprised that it's that large. It really wasn't necessary. Talk about overkill.
No kidding.
It's got the Three Stooges.
There they are.
These are like Picasso's, for my generation who grew up on this stuff. And yes, I mean, this just shows you like this weird kind of fascination and obsession that I'm into, that I know a lot of people are into. And with these cartoons specifically, they just mean so much to us. Me as a kid, I grew up with immigrant parents. This was kind of like cheap entertainment for us, put on the 50 cartoons and stuff. And this is what we had. We didn't have YouTube and all that stuff. I'm sounding kind of like an old timer, but this is the stuff that we grew up on. And even in bad, ugly prints, this stuff just shined. This looked amazing. The animation, the Superman stuff. We were basically getting a course in animation history checking out this stuff. And yeah, as we grow older, all this stuff really depends on kind of who owns it. As like Warner Brothers, they've got big push for Looney Tunes, and Disney, of course, with their stuff. But sadly, with the Fleischer material, I don't know, for some reason there wasn't a push for that. But thankfully, with Jane's help, just me connecting with her and kind of just, explaining, why we need to do this, we've been able to accomplish what many could not. This is really historic. I always go into this big spiel, but I'll keep it short. But yeah, this is monumental. This stuff is just amazing. This is the stuff that just makes people just, feel emotional. There's, like I said, there's a connection to this stuff. They're not just these silly cartoons, Betty Boop especially. I mean, I have a merchandise company. One of the sad things about my company is every once in a while I get a request. Could you send 20 Betty Boop pins? My grandma just passed away. My aunt just passed away. Like, there's such a deep love for this stuff. And, I was at Jane's family's house. I was like, you guys are like the Picasso family. Like, you guys really are like this family that just created such beautiful artwork that just is really amazing. And yeah, I'm just excited. Like I said, that was the first time I showed those paintings, so I was just really thrilled to show that, by the way. But yes, I love this stuff.
No, I mean, you found the right audience for it, believe me. Jane, I mean, when you were growing up, your father was obviously directing, huge movies. Like, how present was your grandfather's legacy in your life, in your family's life when you were growing up?
Well, we always knew that he was important in the world of animation. And my father adored his father and really felt that he was an overlooked genius. So he was present in that respect. However, first of all, for me personally, my childhood was mostly spent in Europe and we didn't have television. So I had no idea what he did other than I'd heard of, I saw pictures of Betty Boop, but that was about it. So I had no idea of what he did, or I didn't, like Mauricio or Ray, didn't grow up watching the cartoons. So it really wasn't until actually much later when I was in art school that I started to realize that, yeah, my grandfather did some cool stuff. And I was completely unaware of it until then. He was really just Papa Max.
Right. Yeah. When I think of your father's work, it was very different kinds of films, very different scale of film. Do you think there was a direct influence of Max or Dave, for that matter, Fleischer, on your father's work and how that manifested?
Definitely. And one of the ways it manifested was really Max started out as an inventor. He liked machines and mechanics, and he was a good artist and illustrator. And his earliest stuff was drawing pictures of machines. And Max's real interest was, how do I make things work? How can I either improve this, or how can I invent this, and all five brothers had the same kind of bent. They wanted to know, like one of the brothers actually invented, the claw machine in arcades where where you might know which brother it was.
Charlie, the old
Charlie invented that.
That's incredible.
So all of them were looking around for, just how do we make stuff work? My dad, when he was making his films, one of the things he adored was similar in that it was, how can I achieve that effect? How can I make that scene work? He, before computers and CG and all of that, he was creating special effects. He did Fantastic Voyage, which was the travel through the body. It was inner space. And he and his artists had to design, what would the body look like? What would a red blood cell look like if it was bigger than you? He loved that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And wasn't it also interesting, too? There's an interesting parallel in his earlier life. Remember, you might want to mention the fact that he started out with a medical degree.
Yes, that's true. Actually, he didn't get the degree, but he was in medical school and didn't finish. He fell in love with the theater.
Mauricio, you alluded earlier to Warner Brothers, Disney. These are huge companies where their cartoons are, valuable IP for them. So there's been a lot of investment from those companies over the years of restoring and keeping those cartoons in circulation. What happened with the Fleischer cartoons exactly that sort of led them to being in this limbo state for so many years?
From what I think, maybe because, like I said, the characters themselves, Betty Boop was owned by Fleischer Studios. They own the copyright and all that sort of stuff. And I just assume maybe Paramount, because they didn't have ownership of the character where they can fully exploit it. Like, for example, they own Nickelodeon, they can exploit a SpongeBob. But maybe perhaps because they don't own that character, there really wasn't a push for that. Because I know when Republic owned the Betty Boop cartoons, they put out like a VHS and they put out a Laserdisc. But after that, there really wasn't much of a push for that. At least from what I remember growing up, the only thing that was really on TV was, the Popeye cartoons, like on Cartoon Network or something like that. But as to how we managed to get the ball rolling, I mean, essentially by connecting with Jane, a family member of Fleischer Studios, of Fleischer, they still have a great relationship with Paramount. And we essentially, just said, hey, it looks like there's an interest in this stuff. We want to be able to, maybe pull out some films and restore them and do some screenings. And as we've been slowly, getting the ball rolling, getting stuff restored, putting on the shows and showing Paramount that there is such a big interest in this stuff, the relationship has just gotten better. We've been able to restore, I think, like around 80 cartoons now. And with their support, I mean, the fact that they still have a lot of the negatives and a lot of the prints just there waiting to be restored, it's just been really a dream. Every other couple of weeks we get a new cartoon. It's like a Christmas present. But yeah, I think now with like I said, just this interest with online social media, that when I put out a clip, when we share this stuff, and yeah, people have just not seen this stuff before in this condition. And there's still a lot of cartoons that have not been given the light. I mean, one of the biggest reasons we're doing this too is because of the Coco cartoons. The Out of the Inkle cartoons have not been in circulation. That's more stuff that we have to get through other archives. But that stuff as well has just been really fascinating to work on. That stuff's just inventive, really psychedelic, and just really awesome to see. But yeah, that's where we're at now.
And I'll chime in at this point. I can fill in a lot of the holes here. Going back to your original question about the IP thing compared to Warner's and Disney and everything like that. First of all, as a side note, 25 years ago, I marketed a 2 DVD set of a collection of 60 of the 90 of the Inkwell films. More have been found since then. But getting back to your original question, it's a complicated issue that goes back to when Paramount first sold those cartoons. And they didn't sell the complete library. They sold it in thirds. So the non-Popeyes were sold to UM&M Television along with essentially their old short subject library anyway. So the cartoons were included with that. The trouble with it is it was sort of like a fast buck sale because they realized that within 10 years, the material they thought would be too dated. And because television ate up so material that within 7 or 8 years, yes, those things had just been worn out after a while. So by the time those 7-year licenses were expired from the original company that became NTA that took it over, they essentially did not circulate the black and white cartoons in the mid-60s because of color television. So the only color series that Fleischer had were the color classics, and some of those were in circulation in the NTA package. But for the most part, because they were largely in black and white, they thought there was no market for them. They were rediscovered in the 1970s through underground screenings and that sort of thing. And then after Max passed away, there was a retrospective that was put together called The Betty Boop Scandals of 1974. And that started the whole interest all over again. And right after that, that was followed by the Popeye Follies that United Artists put together. So that gave them more life. The one saving grace in the Popeye package was the 3 specials that Fleischer Studios had produced. But because the Popeye package was so important, the 109 black and whites were always included as well. And those are the classic ones that everybody loves. But as far as IP is concerned, the dilemma with Fleischer Studios is that Betty Boop was the only original character they had that had any value. and the rest of their successes were licensed characters. Popeye was licensed. Superman was licensed. So that was also part of the complication that was involved there. So you had to deal with second parties. And a lot of that had to do with the exposure of the cartoons as well. And unfortunately, fortunately, the majority of the color Fleischer material fell into the public domain starting in 1964.
And how did that happen? Did they not renew the license? How was that allowed to happen?
That's correct, because the original copyrights were for 28 years then, for a total of 56 years. And NTA failed to restart the renewals in 1963, thinking that there was no future life in them.
And the Superman as well are all public domain, right, Ray?
Yes, they are.
And that one's crazy to me. The fact that they let that go is just wild. Well,
the thing that happened there was that the Supermans were sold to a film distributor called Flamingo Film Sales. And it was the same deal there. They went out of business by the time the renewal period came up. So for about 20 years, nobody knew anything about the original negatives where they were until 1980. And they were discovered over at National Periodical Publications. So there was some clause in the licensing where after the theatrical period was finished, that the original IP holder of Superman was supposed to gain possession of the negatives. Fortunately, they did not follow suit as what King Features would have done when they licensed their various properties to the serials. And so after that was over with, then the negatives were to be returned to King Features for destruction. That's why there are no original negatives on Captain Marvel or Captain America and things of that nature.
Just point of information, not to get too bogged down in copyright, but I am very curious about this. I mean, Superman himself is obviously very much not in the public domain. I mean, to what extent are you able to work with those cartoons that I guess theoretically are in the public domain?
The fine point is which definition of Superman you're speaking of. Because the Superman from 1937 is not the current Superman. And it's like when you have a design or a patent, the patent was originally only good for 17 years, and then you have to have a refinement on it. So if it's not refined or redefined in some respect, then the patent is no longer in effect. So Superman is not only an IP property, but it's also a trademark. So by refining it or redefining it, they can continue the copyright on it. But the form of Superman in 1941 is in the public domain because that design is not the current design.
As long as we can find our own prints, which we've managed to do, I think we have like 6 out of the Fleischer ones, and we've gotten like 35 prints from the Academy archive. So we can restore them and, we could screen them, no issue, because they are in the public domain. But in terms of getting access to the original like negatives and stuff like that, sadly, we just can't.
Time Warner has them.
Right.
So that's the deal on that. They have done some restorations from the successive exposure negatives. What that means is it was 3 frames of representing each color, and then it would be extracted to make the dye transfer to keep the technical aspect simple. But it was one negative with 3 exposures for each color.
Getting back to the restoration work, it sounds like from what you've been saying so far, the prints come from many different sources. You have some original negatives, but not all original negatives. Like what kind of percentage of them are from the original negative? And yeah, just general, the major pain points for all of you on a project like this.
The first major problem is finding decent assets or elements. So for instance, there's many copies of some of the films around, but they're in terrible condition. So we look for the best condition we can find, and if possible, 35 millimeter. And again, you could have a 16 millimeter print that's in much better condition than the 35. So you're looking for where's the best asset, who's got it. Secondly will become, will they allow us to scan it? Will they release it to us? And as Ray was kind of indicating also, for instance, there are companies that have fabulous assets, but they're not willing to share, that we can't get them from them. So that's the next big challenge. Sometimes it's finding the whole thing. We'll find films with frames missing or scenes missing or half a film. So that's another problem that we've got.
And finding anything from 100 years ago in 35 millimeter. And we've got maybe 3 or 4 from the Brave period from 1921. That's extremely rare.
Once we found them, then, you've got to get them to the restoration artists. And, it takes time, it takes money, it's expensive. And, we've got one Thad Komorowski, who works with us, is amazing and fantastic. And he can get these things done really quickly, but a lot of other people that we have worked with, and they're good artists, but it takes a long time.
And the other challenge too is the fact, remember that this was on the nitrate film stock, and we came across a 35 millimeter of bubbles from 1922, and it was just deteriorated beyond use. We had another one that has some deterioration on the sides. It's passable, but it's not ideal. But that's the challenge when you're dealing with these things that have just been practically thrown on the trash heap, and we're trying to dig for them.
What's a cartoon that you found or worked on that was in particularly bad condition, maybe, that you're really happy to see restored?
Honestly, I can't think of one that was really bad and now looks great, because that's the thing. It's usually one or the other we've been finding. Usually, the prints are really awesome, or they're just like messed up. One that comes to mind that I'm glad we scanned, even though it is deteriorating, is the one that Ray's talking about. It's Out of the Inkwell Claytown, which is a Coco the Clown early cartoon. Ray, I don't know if you remember what year that is, but it's like 20-something. But the reason it's like a highlight is because in the episode, because if you're not familiar with an Out of the Inkwell episode, it's Max draws Coco the Clown, and then Coco comes to life, interacts with Max Fleischer, and then Coco comes out and comes out in the real world and messes with him. Those are just amazing. And this one particularly, there's a lot of stop motion. It's called Claytown because Max is building a little clay Coco that comes to life. So you actually get to see, another medium other than animation. You get to see stop motion. And then Coco goes into literally a clay town where it's like a 2D animation walking around in this 3D, awesome, just really cool kind of background. And then there's like a two-headed like giant. There's like a lion, and everything's just moving. And it's just really awesome.
Because it might be one of the earliest extensive uses of claymation. This is 90% of it is all claymation.
Essentially, with this print, the archive was like, yeah, we have it, but it's just really, it's deteriorating. Essentially, yeah, the sides kind of warp like this. So you can get some full frame, but then kind of the other ones are just see the deterioration. But you can see a good enough of an image where you're just like, wow, that just looks amazing, because it is a 35 print. And one also that just really stood out too, that the British Pathé had uploaded, this clip of one that I really love called Coco's The Runaway, which is essentially Coco goes to hell. He goes down, interacts with the devil and all this sort of stuff, but they mislabeled it. But I've seen this cartoon so much that I recall this scene, and I clicked on it. I was like, oh my God, this is The Runaway, and it's a 35 print, and it's tinted, meaning, certain scenes have this red tint when he's in hell, and then it goes into like purple, which, is really rare to find. Usually, the copies are all in black and white, but that was one that we restored. And that one, I was really happy that we managed to get that one with the original tint on it. But the Out of the Inkwells one specifically are the ones that, whenever we can find a good print of it, those are always a blessing to get, because those are just so awesome. And Jane and I have just been nerding out over them. Coco's our favorite now. So
it wasn't that scan that you got from Library of Congress of Coco Celebrates the 4th, and that one I think is incomplete. But that one was hand tinted. They had colored the fire on the match and the firecracker.
And that's the cool thing, is connecting with Jane and basically going to these archives and saying, hey, we're looking for my grandfather's cartoon. Do you have anything? They're being super generous. They're being super helpful. So this has been really a labor of love. And just to kind of put it out there, this is all backed by us. We do screenings. As you can see, I have the merch. I'm trying to push that stuff. It kind of feeds into what we're doing. And, basically this is a grassroots sort of movement. We want to get these cartoons out there. We think this stuff is still special and amazing, and we just hope people just enjoy the stuff all over again.
It's been packed every time. We've been very fortunate about that. I think it's largely simply because this stuff is new to them. And a lot of what they've been exposed to on television, it's been on for 50, 60 years. It's been on and on and on and on and on. And people want to see something else. And they're totally amazed at this different perspective to animation, which the Fleischers had. And one of the things that was also unique about Out of the Inkwell was the fact that there was a lot of experimental things that they used as well. So that was unique in what they were doing that others were not. The rest of them were pretty much following the same formula in production.
When I was a kid watching those tapes, sometimes you'd see Popeye meets Alibaba, then you'd see All's Fair at the Fair, or just some random cartoon like that. And it was all just in the same big box. And I remember over time seeing them and sort of becoming familiar, not even knowing who Max Fleischer was or Dave Fleischer, but just becoming familiar with the rotoscope style. When you're programming it now, to what extent do you think about curation, about the arrangement of the cartoons? Are you telling a story of the career and the evolving style when you show these cartoons, or is it still a bit of a grab bag,
Well, basically, it's a little bit of both, depending on what the venue wants. Sometimes if they want a themed something, like we're putting together a Halloween themed block right now. But other than that, Mauricio does the curation, and he's really good at it. So what's in your head, Mauricio, when you put together a block of tunes?
It's kind of like DJing music, you got to feel what the audience is going to dig. You start off with, start them off slow, then kind of, get them excited, make them laugh for another one. So because I've seen this stuff, 24/7, like this is literally my life now, is Fleischer, just all day 24/7 is just watching these cartoons. So thankfully I've been able to kind of figure out what works with what. The particular show that we're going to do at the Fox Theater, that one I'm really excited for, because it's going to have a couple of the color classics that were found in these tapes, but you're going to see them in the way they were meant to be seen, in just beautiful condition. So the way I like to do it is, a mix of from start to finish. Start with an Out of the Inkwell, go into an early Betty Boop, then jump into a Popeye, then, get people with the Superman, and then end with like a really fun, sort of screen song, get the people laughing. But what I want to do for each show is, give them something different. Not every show is the same. I want to put that out there. So if you see that there's a show and there's another one coming up, come on out, because there's literally hundreds of cartoons that I just like to throw in and do a mix of, because I want everybody to see everything that the Fleischers did. But depending on my mood and figuring out, okay, this Inkwell we just finished, let's put that in, and then that goes great with this theme and all that. Because once you see a lot of these, you'll see what kind of fits together. You see the kind of the similarities of some of these tunes. So that's kind of fun to play with.
I'd like to add that we had a big show in New York in March, and each day was a theme. For instance, we had one about music, or the influence of music in the cartoons, or the New York Fleischer state of mind, about the influences they had growing up in New York that worked itself into the cartoons as well, or the evolution of Betty Boop. We had a theme every day.
Actually, one of the ones that was one of the biggest crowd pleasers was the pre-code. Mauricio put together a block of pre-code, and Ray did a kind of informational clip about it, about what was pre-code, what does that mean, and what was the code. And the audience, when he had some clips of Hayes and then Breen, who were the code people, the audience started hissing and booing. It was great.
That was at the Museum of Modern Art, right? You've had a strong contingent of, adult audiences coming out for the cartoons. I mean, whenever I see them, as you know, they're just a little harder, a little tougher. They have a different kind of snap than the Disney cartoons.
These never intended for children in the first place, at least up until the mid-30s. But what's interesting is that one of our earlier screenings, this was almost 2 years ago, remember when that little girl spoke up from the audience and she said, "I like these"?
Yeah, that's right.
Stuff goes over the kids' heads. They still like it anyway, because I don't think that they had really been exposed to fluid animation and the lush artwork that was used in those days. And so this is a completely new experience for them.
Mauricio, you mentioned that it's a very grassroots restoration effort. So simply, how can people support? What are the best ways to keep this train going?
Honestly, the best way is to come out and support the show. Come on out to one of our screenings. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, Twitter, all the social media at Fleischer Tunes. Follow us. And if there's a venue near you, is there a theater near you that you want to see us, come check out your show, send us a message. I want to reach out. We want to be able to book a show near your town. That's the biggest way to, kind of get support, is come out to the shows. That, the money goes back into restoring more stuff. Outside of that, we do have a Patreon. And like I said, it's at Fleischer Tunes, the at Fleischer Tunes Patreon. If you want to be a part of that, see how we're working on this stuff, see what's coming up, see what we're restoring, stuff like that. And I also have merchandise. I have the Rockin' Pins website. I got official merch for Popeye and Betty Boop. And by the way, Will, thank you for wearing the Sinbad Knockout show. That really helped me out. People just been digging that, and that's what I want to do.
Have people bought it after I posted about it? Did it move some units?
Oh, absolutely. And what's really cool is King Features has been also really supportive of our work, and that's the people who own Popeye. So we're hopefully eventually you're going to start seeing, Popeye be incorporated into like our posters and stuff like that. And I want to show you something really cool. We're going to be doing popcorn boxes. So we're trying to, step up our game. And, when we go to one of our shows to get one of these cool little Fleischer popcorn boxes. But yeah, come out, support the show, follow us at Fleischer Tunes on all social media, Patreon if you want to check the stuff out. But yeah, just coming out and enjoy the show. We want you to watch these cartoons.
And not only that, it's a lot of times it's a lot more than just seeing the cartoons. Jane and I appear at as many of these as we can, because naturally when they see these things, questions come up and they get very curious about what happened here, or what were they like, or what were the brothers like, and Jane field those questions, or how did they do this, and so forth. And so that's where we show up. It stirs people's curiosity. So there's an interest level just beyond seeing the cartoons for seeing the cartoons. They want to know more. And fortunately, I have a book for that.
Yes.
Which it's called The Art and Inventions of Max Fleischer, by the way. That actually leads me, I guess, to my last question. I mean, I can't have Max Fleischer's granddaughter here and not ask one of those sorts of questions. So, I mean, I guess, you would have been very young when you knew him. I guess I can't just ask, like, what kind of a guy was he? That's not a very good question. But, I mean, it would have been years after, the end of his empire. How often did he talk about it? What was his attitude towards his career? What was his attitude towards his brother at that time?
Well, as a man, he was a very gentle, loving, genteel person. He loved his family. He loved humor. There was obviously a big rift in the family when the studio fell apart, and the two, Max and Dave, blamed each other. So I grew up not knowing Dave's side of the family at all. Like we said, there were 5 brothers. Lou Fleischer was musically oriented, and my parents got to know Lou's son in California. Lou was part of the Tijuana Brass back in the day, and that was Bernie Fleischer, and everybody loved each other. I mean, the families were just, they delighted in each other. So we got to know, Lou was quite old at that time, but we got to know Bernie. And in terms of the closure of the studio, frankly, it was heartbreaking. It was really a devastation to my grandfather. Ray writes about it. My dad wrote about it. And it was very sudden and unexpected and disastrous. So that's a bad note to end on. On the good side, we as a family, once our family dog, was really my brother's dog, broke his tail somehow. And my grandfather drew this funny picture of the dog Harry with his tail in a cast and a little machine to help carry his tail with him as he went. We got little drawings like that all the time. He was just a charming man in terms of his love for his family.
Well, I've probably seen Popeye meets Sinbad the Sailor maybe more than anything I've seen in my life. Just because of the length of it, it was on constant rotation. So the legacy lives on.
Thank you.
I saw Dr. Dolittle a lot growing up too. So
great.
a lot of the Fleischer legacy in my childhood.
Oh, the most remarkable, extraordinary fellow, Sinbad the Sailor. I scare all creation on land or on sea, but talk about women, they all fall for me. I take my adventures wherever they're found. I don't want to brag, folks, but I've been around. Oh, the most phenomenal, extra special kind of fellow, Sinbad the Sailor.